Hey friends, today I'm going to talk about a wacky news story about George Church, that guy up above me with a magnificent beard. I am so jealous. That's a great beard. Anyway, uh, but first, I want to emphasize that Church is not some kook, as I often talk about. He's a genuinely brilliant guy with substantial accomplishments under his belt. He made significant contributions to genome sequencing technology. He's been behind a lot of major research initiatives. He has earned his stripes as a respected scientist, and I don't want to diminish that respect at all. He is not, I emphasize, not an Elon Musk type. In other words, he's not a ridiculously rich guy who buys companies and engineers and then claims their work as his own. Church is the real deal. He's done the stuff. Okay, but that doesn't mean that every idea that drips from his brain is golden. And even with someone as smart as Church, skeptical thinking and critical thinking, they all apply. Don't let those slide by. Okay, so for instance, I met Church briefly. We don't know each other. He doesn't know me at all. I met him briefly at an event in Boston many years ago where everyone was talking about speculative science. There was somebody from SETI there, and lots of people talking about extraterrestrial life. And Church had his very own idea about that. He proposed that we load up needles, millions of little hollow needles, with terrestrial DNA and fire them at distant stars. Yeah, they'd have very low mass, so you could get them up to tremendous speeds. Think some kind of nuclear explosion to launch them out or something. I have no idea. And you wouldn't need a lot of expense to do this, so you could bombard distant planets with our DNA. Uh, Basically, he's proposing to shotgun blast other worlds with Earth-like organisms, not even organisms, DNA, in preparation for our eventual arrival. As speculation, it's fine, but it's not going to happen. First of all, it would be unethical, right? It's surprising that he didn't mention that since he has enough money and interest in bioethics that he hired a philosopher to work in his lab to remind him of those sorts of things. But secondly, it won't work. He didn't seem to appreciate the distances or the amount of empty space he's aiming at. Every one of his needles is going to miss the target. And only a remote chance any of them would land on a planet. And if it does, what's it going to infect? By what miracle does he expect the tiny DNA payload to take over a biosphere? It just doesn't take much thought to see that this plan was BS. Okay. But I could tell where the idea came from. I mean, in the 1980s, gene gun transfection was invented. And this is a process where you coat tiny heavy metal beads with genetic material and then you shoot them into a target, just blast away. The original experiments were done, for instance, by using an air pistol to fire the beads into onions, and it worked. They got incorporation expression of the genes in the plants. Um, Blowing up schemes to get our genes expressed on alien worlds. This doesn't work though. We can't just scale up to an interplanetary scale for this sort of thing. Also, though, I thought, gene guns have been used to inject DNA vaccines into animals, which suggests a solution to our current idiotic anti-vaccine problem. Hmm. Unfortunately, though, I am considering the ethics of it would be highly unethical to load up an air pistol with DNA vaccine for COVID and run around shooting people who aren't wearing their masks. That would just don't do that. Okay, I'm not proposing to do that. Don't get me wrong. I just think it's a clever, cute idea. Okay, another flaw I would say in church is that he's been contaminated badly by the entrepreneur disease. He's good at raising money. That's not a flaw. That's very helpful if you're a scientist. And he's founded quite a few tech startups, and the venture capitalists all listen to him very attentively. Unfortunately, he seems to listen back, and he's made some very, very bad decisions. In particular, he was way too chummy with Jeffrey Epstein, and most surprisingly, he has faced very little blowback from that. This is, yeah, he was hanging out with Epstein for a while, and this was after he'd been convicted, and he just didn't get it. His excuse was that, well, tech nerds tend to have tunnel vision. No, I don't buy that. I'm kind of techie, not on the scale that he is, and I'm definitely a nerd, and I would be conscious of that little problem. Furthermore, in this little story, I thought this was typical George Church. Um, he wasn't consulted on Epstein's plan to set up a little enclave with beautiful women to be inseminated with his own DNA. Yeah, so Church had nothing to do that. But what he said is he was surprised that he wasn't involved. He says, I would have thought I would have been involved in that kind of conversation, but it didn't tend to go in that direction. Okay. But also he says, I think people tend to behave themselves around me. Oh, there's nerd tunnel vision. I don't buy that for a minute. Yeah, that sounds like a Lawrence Krauss sort of thing. Okay, so he was associated with Epstein, but I have to emphasize he's one of the few scientists who apologized for his rather unpleasant association with Epstein. So he's come right out and said that was wrong. I shouldn't have. I should have been more aware. So big ups to George Church for at least that much. Doesn't quite excuse hanging out with a convicted pedophile, but okay, at least if you hammer at him enough, he can become conscious of it. All right. So what's he up to nowadays? Church has gotten another company, another startup. It's called colossal.com. You can go there and look. And he's got this grand scheme in which they are going to use gene editing technology to resurrect the woolly mammoth. Oh, shades of Jurassic Park. Yeah, but that's what he wants to do. Yeah, you can extract DNA from the frozen mammoths in the permafrost and things like that. So yeah, you could imagine getting that sequence. But there's a few little problems with doing that. And let me just give you the bottom line right now. They are not going to resurrect any mammoths. It's not going to happen. Yeah, there's all these news stories that seem to think, oh yeah, it's going to happen. No, it's not. I'm just kind of astonished that the news media are falling for this. In particular, there was a story in The Guardian that touted this thing. And oh, wait a minute. This is the wrong article. This is an old article from 4 years ago, where the Guardian announced that the woolly mammoth is on the verge of resurrection. And they announced the Harvard team is just 2 years away from creating embryos. Yeah, 4 years ago. Uh, this should tell you that there's a potential problem, because this is the latest article that is getting so much attention, also from The Guardian. So a firm raises $15 million to bring back woolly mammoth from extinction. Sure, yeah, that's what it says. If you look closely, though, it says their first calves are expected in 6 years. This is not supposed to be how time works. Okay, if you say something's going to happen in 2 years and then you wait 4 years, you're then supposed to say it happened 2 years ago, not it will happen 6 years from now. But that's the position they're in. So they're, yeah, they, this is the Guardian. They've got the archives. They should have looked at this and said, hey, wait a minute, we got to flag this. There's something suspicious about their claims. And to their credit, the Guardian does come through and cite some criticisms of this whole idea. So I'll get to that in a moment. Okay, so what does the article say? Well, so what's got them excited is that the boost comes in the form of 15 million or 11 million pounds raised by the bioscience and genetics company Colossal, co-founded by Ben Lamb, a tech and software entrepreneur, and George Church. Okay, I have highlighted something there, that $15 million. And I put 3 exclamation points there, not because I'm astounded at this vast sum, but by the patent inadequacy of the sum to do what they want to do. That's just simply absurd. It's not going to work. Okay, you can't do this for $15 million. And George Church, who is a big name in biotechnology and has raised all this money from tech companies, has to know that this is kind of pathetic. Yeah, no, it's simply not going to work. I would also add that reading through their prospectus and all this other stuff about the project, the people behind it are not particularly noteworthy or interesting or qualified or educated in this field. So that's another reason I don't think anything is going to happen with this. Okay. Just to start with the budget problems, just look, I had to look it up. I have no idea how much it costs to buy an elephant or raise one. So I found this one place that had some numbers associated with it. Okay, so if I wanted to buy an elephant right now, it would cost me $12,000 to $60,000. But they're really hard to get your hands on because they're endangered or threatened, depending which species you're working with. And yeah, where are you going to get these? You're going to get it from some failed zoo somewhere, I presume. It's going to be hard to track these down. But then that's a fair amount of money. Let's just say $50,000. How many elephants can you buy with 15 million if they cost 50,000 each? Yeah, you do the math. And then, of course, there's this other problem. They estimate it costs $10 million to build an enclosure for an elephant. Notice I said an elephant. Elephants need space. They need lots and lots of room, and they need lots of supplies. They need money pouring in to feed them. They eat a lot. So where are they going to put all of their elephants? Or do they really think it'll just take one mama elephant and we're done? I don't think so. So this is an expensive proposition, and they've raised very little money. A basic biotech lab at a university, molecular biology, all that kind of stuff. Startup costs are, they're going to pay you $5 to $10 million for, a prestigious R1 university, not like where I am. But at a big name university, there's millions of dollars that are going to be invested just to start up one guy in a position. So yeah, this is piddling sums of money. It's just not going to happen. The other thing is, I don't know how they're going to do it. There are these things called pilot projects you have to do in order to get this to work. If you were writing an NIH grant, or an NSF grant in this case, I guess, to work with elephants as a model system, and you said $10 million, they would laugh you off the review board. That's just not going to happen. So an old friend of mine, Greg Layden, also made a very relevant comment here. This hasn't been done. So he He says, I will not bother to get an opinion about bringing back the woolly mammoth until scientists have first rummaged through a dumpster behind KFC and brought back a chicken. Yeah, uh, this is harder than it sounds. I know biotech entrepreneurs love to inflate and give a lot of hype about all the amazing things they can do with their technology. But there are some basic things that we're going to take a lot of work to do. You know, if you wanted to get really fancy here, I would say here's a different proposal. Okay, they want to make they argue they want to make cold adapted elephants so that they can live in the far north. How about this for a preliminary project? Let's make water resistant chickens by splicing in the relevant genes from a duck. Can we do that? No, we can't. That would be a huge project. We're talking many millions of dollars to do that, and chickens are easy to raise in large numbers, and the eggs are easy to work with. Elephant eggs, not easy to work with. Uh, so that's a lesser project, but why aren't we proposing to do that before we start modifying elephants? So this is a big problem. The technology is not there, and they're just pretending that they have it. Here's another big problem for me. Why? Why do we want to resurrect mammoths other than that they're really cool? Okay. George Church seems to have a little bit of an obsession with mammoths. You know, he's gone on field trips and looked at mammoth bones, and he's gone and visited frozen mammoths, and so let's just say he's really into mammoths, and that is cool. That is wonderful. I appreciate that in a scientist. They get a lot of enthusiasm for their experimental subjects. It's like I'm really into spiders, and is that sufficient justification for me to go to biotech firms in Silicon Valley and say, hey, give me a piddling amount, 10 or 15 million dollars, so that I can research how to graft extra limbs onto human beings? You know, we're missing something by having only 4 limbs. We need 8. Let's double it. And I could write a little justification for that. Would you give me the money for that? No, they're not going to do that. My obsession is not sufficient qualification to do this. So anyway, the question is why? So I go to colossal.com and I try to find their justification, and they've got one. Oh boy, look here. Their goals for reviving the mammoth. And look here, there's 10 big goals that they want to accomplish with this project. And that's good. That's a good start. Yeah, if you're doing a grant proposal, that's one of the things you have to do is specify your aims, your goals for doing this project. And here they got 10 of them. But then I started looking at their goals, and they're flaky. They just make no sense. So a couple of them, all right. So number 6, to understand the dominant traits among cold-resistant genomes. Yeah, I wouldn't do that with mammoths and elephants, though. Work with rabbits. How do cold adapted rabbits thrive in the far north and versus hares down farther south and all? Yeah, do that. Start there, and that will give you information on cold resistant genomes, or better yet, work on bacteria, even cheaper. So that's kind of an odd one to have in here. And then number 10, okay, number 10 is the one I believe, to drive advancements in multiplex CRISPR editing. So I could believe that they went to a bunch of Silicon Valley filthy rich billionaires and proposed this project as a test bed for working out ways to modify the human genome, make superhumans and all this kind of cool stuff. Yeah, okay, I don't believe it as a good goal, but sure, I could see where you could propose that to raise money. So that's 2 of them. 2 of them are really kind of biotech sort of things. What about the rest? All these ones I just marked in green, those are all ecologically minded proposals. They don't have ecologists on their staff. Well, maybe they've got one or two buried in there somewhere. But this is really weird uh, that they're saying, okay, we want to bring back mammoths to deaccelerate melting of the Arctic permafrost. They haven't demonstrated that that would happen. But okay, to prevent the emission of greenhouse gases trapped within the permafrost layer. Yeah, that's one of the consequences of decelerating the melting of the permafrost. Isn't that the same thing as the first one? And then number 3, to revert now overshrubbed forests back to the natural Arctic grasslands, which help with carbon emission. This is the same thing. They're just kind of repeating themselves with subtle variations. To restore the mammoth steppe in number 4. Okay. Um, Again, that's just hey, that would be cool, but there are ecosystems up in the Arctic right now. Why do you want to revert to this Pleistocene ecosystem? You haven't justified that. Number 5, to foster an ecosystem that can maintain its own defenses against climate change. Okay, the first 5 are just hand waving about climate change and ecology, but they don't justify anything. Number 7, to save modern elephants from extinction. This one is also a little flaky because what they're proposing to do is to take African elephants and modify them extensively with mammoth genes. You're going to, well, first of all, you're not going to recreate mammoths. You're going to create some kind of weird elephant. Um, but it also doesn't save the African elephants because then the African elephants can go extinct. This does not help African elephants. It helps their pet project. And number 9, to equip nature with resilience against humanity's adverse effects on vital ecosystems. Look at number 5 up there, to foster an ecosystem that can maintain its own defenses against climate. It's exactly the same thing. They're basically saying that restoring mammoths would be good for the environment and would help resist climate change without justifying it. So none of that is credible. Just scratch all those off. Notice I didn't mention number 8. Number 8 is just odd. To establish a proven link between genetic sciences and climate change. If it's already a proven link, why do they need to establish it? They're just throwing buzzwords here. So somebody said you need a list of 10 because that's magic. And so they just made up a few ideas and then rephrased them a couple of times. I am not at all impressed. Now further, the Guardian article that I said I promised you I'd come back to it, they also talked about some criticisms here. So they got some genuine scientists to discuss this. So it says, not all scientists suspect that creating mammoth-like animals in the lab is the most effective way to restore the tundra. My personal thinking is that the justifications given, the idea that you could geoengineer the Arctic environment using a herd of mammoths, isn't plausible, said Dr. Victoria Herridge, an evolutionary biologist at the Natural History Museum. The scale at which you'd have to do this experiment is enormous. You are talking about hundreds of thousands of mammoths, each of which take 22 months to gestate and 30 years to grow to maturity. Doesn't that put that $50 million in perspective right there? Yeah, even one mammoth, if you resurrect it, it's going to take you roughly 2 years to gestate and 30 years to grow to maturity. And you're going to carry out this entire vast project with a budget of $15 million. Okay. So Dr. Herridge she hammers that home. That's a good point. This is not going to work. None of their justifications to restore the Arctic tundra are justifiable or make sense or are going to work. Okay, they got another person to talk about this. Gareth Phoenix, a professor of plant and global change ecology at the University of Sheffield, said, while we do need a multitude of different approaches to stop climate change, we also need to initiate solutions responsibly to avoid unintended damaging consequences. That's a huge challenge in the vast Arctic where you have different ecosystems existing under different environmental conditions. Why, no, we're just going to, it's all going to be Mammoth steppe after we're done. Yeah? He says, for instance, mammoths are proposed as a solution to help stop permafrost thaw because they will remove trees, trample and compact the ground, and convert landscapes to grassland. Yeah, refer to previous slide, if they have hundreds of thousands of them, which can help keep the ground cool. However, we know in the forested Arctic regions that trees and moss cover can be critical in protecting permafrost, so removing the trees and trampling the moss would be the last thing you'd want to do. Yeah, their proposal is kind of unsound. I mean, in some ways, it doesn't matter because they're never going to get to the stage where they're trying to restore the Arctic tundra to Pleistocene conditions. They're not even going to get a mammoth out of this project. But some venture capitalist is going to get some money out of it. That's what it's all about. Okay, one other point I want to make. A question I have: is this a dodgy company? The colossal company. I'm reading this stuff and I'm looking through their lists of investors and advisors, and to be honest, I am not at all impressed. This does not look legit. Yeah. For instance, one of their investors is Tony Robbins. Does that make you want to line up and give them more money? What does Tony Robbins know about biology, biotech, ecology, any of those things? Absolutely nothing. But he's proud to be an investor in this company. Okay. Yeah, and reading through the others, I'm not going to go through them all, but some of them have qualifications in biology, and others, hey, their qualification is they're filthy rich. That's kind of it. And maybe that they like to do a little greenwashing by supporting something that is supposedly ecologically sound, even though it's not. Here's their executive advisory board. And I had to look up a few. There's a bunch more too, but again, I don't want to go through every single one of them. Go look them up yourself. Uh, Linda Avey, I won't say much about. She's she was one of the founders of 23andMe, so she's got some cred there. She's been involved in a lot of biotech companies. Okay, is her main role seems to be business oriented. She does have an undergraduate degree in biology, which doesn't impress me. But anyway, she's been involved in all these companies for many years, and so she's on the tech side. Okay, the tech and money side. All right. Richard Garriott, I had heard of before. He's a game developer. I remember him way back in the late 70s and 80s. He wrote some game called Ultima, very popular. Okay. Yeah, great, but that's not a good qualification. Yeah, it's somebody who's got a lot of money and is willing to throw it at this project and wear spacesuits while he's doing it. Peter Diamandis, I have heard of recently. Oh, he's another of those tech bros with lots and lots of money and throwing around lots of venture capital. But where I heard about him was a little incident. This one. So yeah, again, I'm just not thrilled with these people. So what did he do? Well, he threw a big conference thing for wealthy patrons in Los Angeles. He ignored all the restrictions on that at that time on because of the pandemic. So he brought in a whole bunch of people and it turned into a super spreader event. Yeah, all these people who coughed up tens of thousands of dollars just to attend this little mini conference and pat each other on the back came down with COVID. Sweet. All right. So anyway, yeah, I'm not impressed with Peter Diamandis for this. And then afterwards, after all these people were coming down with a serious disease, he tried to make amends by having another event where he had a doctor there to give advice on how to cope with COVID. And yeah, take a look at some of the things that he said. They were told about a range of products that were claimed to either treat COVID-19 or prevent it outright. What they were not told was that 7 of the recommended products were also classified by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration as COVID-19 fraudulent. The fraudulent cures included some I never heard of before. Amniotic fluid. It's supposed to be treated with amniotic fluid, the liquid that surrounds a baby in utero, and it's rich in stem cells. And also with colloidal silver. I've heard of that one, but not as a treatment for COVID-19. So you're supposed this is the stuff that turns people gray if you ingest enough of it. And it's supposed to have antimicrobial effects and all kinds. It's supposed to make you live forever, and if you talk to the wrong people. But the FDA said it's not safe or effective for treating any disease or condition. Yeah. Are you thrilled with his investors yet? I know I'm not. He should get Gwyneth Paltrow. Sure, I'm sure she'd be gullible enough to fall for this. Okay. Um, so what am I going to say in conclusion? That this is not going to happen. George Church has ambitious goals, and I think personally what he's interested in is admirable. Sure, bring the mammoth back. But the company he's associated with, which he is, in part is, I guess he's a co-founder of the company, is pretty okay. And furthermore, the actual goals that they propose to be following are just absurd nonsense, things that are not going to happen, things that can't happen. They're not setting up to do the fundamental work that needs to be done in order for this to occur. So yeah, if you think mammoths are coming back in 6 years or -4 years or whatever, it's not going to happen. Just relax a little bit. That'd be kind of sad because, oh yeah, okay, it would be cool to see. Just go watch Jurassic Park and decide, no, this is a bad idea. I'm picturing mammoths rampaging through Los Angeles now. But don't worry, it's not going to happen. Okay, thanks for stopping by. I'll let you take a look at my list of patrons. You can join them too at patreon.com/PZMyers. And I'll be back sometime. Talk to you later.